What if I told you about a war that lasted for 335 years, but not a single shot was ever fired? A war where no one was hurt, and both sides completely forgot it was even happening. This isn't some work of fiction. It's the strange, almost unbelievable legend of how a tiny group of islands was technically at war with a major European power for over 3 centuries. This is the story of what might just be the most peaceful and most absurd conflict in human history. To understand how a war could get lost in the shuffle, you first need to appreciate the chaos it was born from. Our story starts in the mid-17th century, a time of total turmoil in England. The English Civil War was tearing the kingdom apart. On one side, you had the parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, and on the other, the royalists, loyal to the king. It was a brutal, bloody conflict that had been raging for nearly a decade. By 1651, the royalists were on their last legs, and their remaining navy was forced to retreat to the most remote corner of the kingdom, the Isles of Scilly. Today, this small, rugged archipelago off the coast of Cornwall is a peaceful destination, but back then, it became the final stronghold for a defeated navy. So, where did the Dutch fit into all of this? The Netherlands was a huge maritime power, and they had a vested interest in the English Civil War. For years, they had been allied with the English, but their primary concern was protecting their trade routes. Seeing that the parliamentarians were likely going to win, the Dutch decided to side with them to ensure good relations with England's new leadership. This infuriated the cornered royalists, who began acting like pirates from their base in the Isles of Scilly, raiding Dutch merchant ships in the English Channel. By March 1651, the Dutch had had enough. The story goes that they sent a fleet of 12 warships, led by Admiral Martin Tromp, to the Isles of Scilly to demand reparations for their stolen cargo. When the broke and desperate royalists refused, Admiral Tromp supposedly took matters into his own hands. And here's where the story takes its bizarre, legendary turn. On the 30th of March 1651, Tromp allegedly declared war. But he didn't declare war on England, he declared it specifically on the Isles of Scilly. The problem? Historians still debate whether he even had the authority to declare war in the first place. Plus, you can't technically declare war on a part of a country, only on a sovereign state or a specific warring faction. Almost as soon as this declaration was made, it became irrelevant. Just a few months later, in June 1651, a parliamentarian fleet under Admiral Robert Blake sailed in and forced the royalists to surrender. The English Civil War was over. Seeing their problem was solved, the Dutch fleet simply sailed home. But in their departure, they forgot one tiny detail. They never officially made peace. And so, a state of war, at least on paper, was left dangling. And so began the long, silent, and completely unnoticed war. With no enemy left to fight and no shots ever fired, everyone just forgot. A supposed declaration of war existed in local legend, but it was a conflict lost to time. Think about everything that happened over the next 3 centuries. The Netherlands and Britain fought several other, very real wars against each other. The American and French revolutions rewrote the rules of society. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe. Empires rose and fell. Humanity invented the telephone, the automobile, and the airplane. We went to the moon. And through it all, for 335 years, a tiny archipelago off the coast of England was, according to folklore, still technically at war with the Netherlands. No one on the Isles of Scilly went to bed fearing a Dutch invasion, and no politician in The Hague worried about the Scillonian threat. It was a historical and bureaucratic cosmic joke, waiting for a punchline It's incredible how a forgotten piece of paperwork, or maybe just a story that got out of hand, can create such an absurd chapter in history. If you're enjoying this dive into one of history's weirdest footnotes, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We find the strange, forgotten stories of the past and bring them back to life. The punchline finally arrived in 1985. The hero of our story isn't a general, but a local historian from the Isles of Scilly, named Roy Duncan. Duncan, who was also the chairman of the island's council, had grown up hearing the local legend that the islands were still at war with the Dutch. Most people dismissed it as a funny bit of folklore, but Duncan was curious. Driven by historical curiosity, he wrote to the Dutch embassy in London and asked them to check their records. Imagine the scene at the embassy when a letter arrives, asking if you're still at war with a tiny group of islands from 3 centuries ago. After some searching, the embassy came back with a stunning answer. As far as they could tell, the legend was true. While there was no verifiable declaration of war found, there was also no record of a peace treaty ever being signed. For 335 years, the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly had been in a state of paper war, and nobody had noticed until Roy Duncan decided to ask. This discovery set in motion a wonderfully absurd conclusion. Having confirmed the old legend, Roy Duncan invited the Dutch ambassador to the islands to finally put the matter to rest. On the 17th of April 1986, the Dutch ambassador, Rijn Heidekoper, traveled to the Isles of Scilly to sign a symbolic peace declaration. 335 years after it all began, the so-called war was officially over. The signing was a charming and light-hearted affair. Ambassador Heidekoper joked that it must have been awful for the Scillonians to know we could have attacked at any moment. The conflict, which legend says began in the heat of a civil war, ended with a handshake and a laugh. It had a grand total of 0 casualties, no battles, and for most of its existence, no memory. The peace declaration now hangs in the council chambers on the Isles of Scilly, a testament to the strange and forgotten corners of history. So there you have it, the bizarre story of the 335-year war, a conflict born from a moment of naval frustration that fell through the cracks of history, lying dormant until a curious historian decided to check the archives. It's a story that proves history isn't just about grand battles. It's also about beautiful absurdity and human error. But here's the final twist that makes this story even more perfect. To this day, most historians agree that the 335-year war was never truly a war at all. They argue that Admiral Trump likely didn't have the authority to declare war, and the Isles of Scilly weren't a sovereign nation he could declare war on anyway. Some even suggest any such conflict would have been automatically resolved by a later treaty between England and the Dutch in 1654. So, in the end, we're left with a delightful possibility: the longest war in history, forgotten for centuries and with no casualties, may not have even been a real war to begin with. It was just a historical oddity, a piece of folklore that took on a life of its own, a perfect, bloodless conflict that reminds us that sometimes history is far stranger and funnier than fiction.